So here's going to be a quick summary of sociology and social policy for theory and methods as part of the A-level sociology course. So the first thing we need to think about with sociology and social policy is that social policy refers to a package of plans, of actions engaged or taken on by a government. That could be a national government, it can be local, or it could be lots of various charitable or voluntary organisations. All these policies are designed to solve a problem or have some goal which is achieved. Now, social problems are referred to as something which is seen as harmful to society. Worsley defines it as some piece of social behaviour that causes public friction and or private misery and calls for collective action to solve it. A sociological problem is something which is kind of the concern of a sociologist, and it's obviously a social, it could be a theoretical issue, but it needs to be explained or needs to be solved. There is a lot of debate as to whether obviously sociological problems and social problems are the same thing, and it's worth noting that not all sociological problems are social problems, but all social problems are sociological. By this I mean, just kind of trying to emphasize this point, is that boys underachieving in education is a sociological problem as well as a social problem. So boys underachievement is concerned by sociologists and society. However, girls overachievement in education is a sociological problem, something sociologists are interested in, but is not a social problem that wider society is worried about. So there is this overlap and obviously these distinctions between sociological and social problems. Now, when it comes to politics, there is kind of two big branches of politics. So we have the left wing and the right wing, and in the British political spectrum, there are lots of parties across this spectrum. Left-wing politics tends to encourage or create social cohesion and social unity. Often it requires a reduction or a removal of social exclusion, of marginalisation, and often they try to do this by tackling causes of problems in society, such as poverty, and this may be seen through the use of welfare support and benefits to reduce inequalities, to reduce social problems. The main left-leaning party would be Labour, and it's the most influential left-wing party in the UK and in Parliament today. Policies that have been introduced by Labour would include things like minimum wage, the Sure Start programme, which you would have covered in education, and supporting single parents to bring up children. Now, there is a good relationship between sociology and politics. Anthony Giddens, the sociologist, was very influential in the work of Tony Blair and obviously the new Labour Party. One thing that Giddens introduced that kind of links to this is he talked about the third way in politics, and the idea about the third way was, rather than having these traditional class-based divisions of left and right, Giddens talked about this idea that most political parties who want to generate support may campaign towards a sort of central position, a more central view, which would then allow them to gain power and then commit to those radical measures that was sort of their left-leaning or right-leaning measures. So therefore he advised New Labour not to be afraid of being called conservative or being seen as centralist, because this is the way to gain power, to then be able to engage in your kind of left or right-leaning voting policy. We could probably see the same thing with Keir Starmer and Labour currently. Right-wing politics tend to reduce the welfare state and increase self-responsibility. We know that right-leaning politics tends to favour traditional values and traditional ideologies. With the new right, we see stuff like privatisation, marketisation, and a reduction in benefits. Most of the solutions to problems is taking away support, which creates this over-reliance and dependency of the population. So we see cuts to the public sector, to welfare, and policies like universal credit, which have been generally negative on its impact on the people using them. The Conservative Party is probably the most influential right-leaning party, and again their policies would follow this right-leaning mentality. So again, lots of policies and cuts and reductions to services, obviously seen as a way of incentivising people and women to become self-sufficient and less reliant on state welfare. The big connection between sociology and politics was Charles Murray. Murray was very influential on the Conservative Party of Margaret Thatcher in the sort of early 80s into mid 90s. And again, the idea about the perverse incentive, dependency culture, welfare state, a lot of these ideas fed into new right ideologies about reduction of benefits and welfare, that welfare was a perverse incentive that obviously created problems rather than solved them. When it comes to social policy and sociology, we see the work of Anthony Giddens here, sort of introducing ideas. So Giddens, as we said, had connections to Labour, but Giddens, when he talked about social policy, he said the relationship between sociology and social policy should be that sociology should be used to directly influence government and bring about reforms. Other people argue that sociology is an academic subject. It has no use or value other than to increase self-knowledge. But for Giddens, he argues the relationship between sociology and policy, social policy, enables the following. It allows us to understand society, to have an awareness of cultural differences, increase our self-knowledge, and access the effects or assess the effects of policy. So his argument was about how sociology can be used within sociology. Now, two big case study examples that are worth mentioning is the Thatcher and Black Report study. So the Black Report was commissioned by Labour in 1977. It was used to assess health inequality in society, and it was commissioned under Labour before they left office. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher becomes Prime Minister, the Conservatives take over, and the Black Report was published and was ready to be published early on in Thatcher's premiership. Now, the Black Report was delayed. They released the public report and delayed it till August 1980. When they did release it, they released it over a bank holiday weekend with only a very small number of copies being produced. This meant it reduced the spread of the report and accessibility to it, essentially because the report highlighted that there were a number of issues with the welfare system, with the lack of support, and it encouraged spending, increased welfare support, which kind of went against the Conservative ideology. So Thatcher's government essentially ignored the findings of this report and tried to bury it. So one example of how sociology didn't have an influence on policy, was ignored. On a sort of side note, a very similar event was Blair and the Akerson report. Now, the Akerson report was a report commissioned by the Labour government in 1997, just as they came into power. And again, it was looking at very similar things about the health of the nation, how to improve health and welfare, and reduce health inequality. The report was, in this case, taken on board. The work of sociologists and researchers was taken on board. It led to the development of a white paper called, obviously, The Health of the Nation, or Healthier Nation, and it tried to reduce the gap in health between the wealthiest and the poorest in society. And health inequality targets were kind of being met, but were abandoned when the coalition came into power in 2011. Now, additionally, other things we need to think about here would be the influences that social policy can have, and often the other things that influence sociology beyond sociologists. So cost is always one thing that influences social policy. Government funding is very limited. Research and money will be given to some topics, some policies within the framework of that government. So austerity has been a big factor in, obviously, the government attitudes of not wanting to spend money. That's led to cuts in welfare and other programs. Globalization needs to be taken into account when looking at social policy and the creation of policy. This is a big influence. Global issues like Brexit, America withdrawing from intelligence sharing if the UK adopted the Chinese created 5G network. These global issues can affect policy. So it isn't just sociology that has an impact. Political ideologies, again, governments will use, ignore, or distort data to support their views. Think of a few years ago, the little extras, cash for school from Chancellor Shekhar, which was heavily criticised as a sort of tokenistic and very minimal gesture, despite years of cuts to education. Or Priti Patel claiming the government was not to blame for poverty at the back of 10 years of government enforced austerity. Electoral popularity, again, governments will ignore unpopular policies, unpopular information, because they want to win the government. David Cameron said there would be a referendum on Brexit and European membership as a means of securing votes and conservative power. Again, it was a very popular and, as we can see recently, probably poorly executed idea. Inequalities in power, again, always have a big role to play here. So the powerful are the ones who make decisions. They will create policies that work in their interests and support their power. And then lastly, demographic trends. So the different populations have different demographic breakdowns. So for example, if an election was done based on age, the younger vote would definitely lean left towards Labour. Older votes tend to lean right. So obviously one of the big things that we also see is that as populations change, we have an aging population. This is going to change voting as we go, and it'll be more based on these demographics and local patterns. Theoretically, each theory has a different view on the way sociology and social policy work. Functionalism, often very positive of social policies because they see policies as being beneficial for the whole of society. Policies such as national curriculum, equal opportunity, meritocracy are going to be seen favourably by functionalism. The new right are going to follow their views of tradition and welfare state reduction. So we could think about policies like Section 28, marketisation, privatisation. Marxism, if we go with traditional, is going to be quite critical of policy. They're going to see social policy as a tool, part of the ideological state apparatus, to control, oppress and subdue the working classes, or to benefit capitalism. The welfare state and the myth of meritocracy will be two examples of this. So again, welfare being basic and sufficient to keep you alive, but not enough to help you live. New right would talk about the autonomy of society and how there is a political level which is separate from the superstructure and infrastructure, and it can affect the working classes without sort of too much control from the other elements of society. So EMA, to encourage HE participation, would be a good example of that political tool improving lives. Feminism, if we take the different branches, left and liberal feminism is going to see a march of progress, an improvement in the position of women over time. Radical feminists are going to see policy as reinforcing patriarchy. Social action theory isn't a big picture approach. It's all about the individuals, the small scale impact of policy. So again, Rutter and the school effect study, Sewell, full of looking at racism. They're looking at what's happening in the schools affecting pupils and not so much about the wider social effects. And last but not least, postmodernism. Postmodernism would see social policy as part of a meta-narrative which is obsolete. So the big picture, the big explanations, no longer relevant. And again, the emphasis for them would be on diversity in education. And last but not least, does sociology influence policy? So yes, it does. So when a sociological problem becomes a social problem, then sociology can provide support and insight. Sociological research and information evaluation can highlight issues within a political system. It can encourage thinkers to be accepted by politicians. Murray and Giddens are good examples of sociologists influencing political powers and guiding policy. The research from sociologists has guided politicians in the past. So again, Akerson report and Tony Blair's government again was heavily influenced by the research of sociologists, and it also can provide empirical evidence. Sociology provides a lot of data. Politicians need data to justify policies, actions or changes in society. So again, the research of sociologists is still relevant. Arguments against, however, that sociology doesn't influence policy would be that sociological problems are not always considered a social one and therefore are ignored. Political powers can disregard sociology. Sociology has often been a subject which has been the subject of criticism, not seen as a true science, and therefore the research can be ignored. Also, if the research highlights problems in society or problems within government, the political powers will ignore it to avoid criticism or seen in a negative way. Ideological preferences will have a role here as well. So no matter what the sociologists say, if a political party has a particular agenda, attitude or view, they will take that action. So for example, with right realism, and their attitudes towards crime. Most social policy, most evidence suggests that tougher punishments, tougher sentencing, zero tolerance policing doesn't necessarily reduce crime, it displaces it, it moves it elsewhere. And if you're a right-leaning politician, you probably would take the right realism stance. We also have wider political issues. Brexit can have a big influence, and so, for example, within the Brexit debate, evidence produced by sociologists, by economists, other thinkers highlighting problems was discredited as Project Fear. However, since Brexit has taken place, we've seen some of those ideas to be Project Fact. And then last but not least, conflict theories highlight the view that powerful make policy, and they're going to do policy in their favour, whether or not the evidence suggests otherwise. Last but not least, just a little bit of a look at how questions may appear. I know this is a longer video than other topics, but you can see here just a few style questions that could relate. So essentially a lot of the 10 markers will be about how sociology and policy are connected, or how sociology is influential on policy, and then the opposite question will be how sociology is not influential on policy. We might also get these 10 markers arguing about how researchers should not be involved. So obviously why sociologists should not be connected to social policy. And then last but not least, this 20 marker here, again, evaluate the extent to which sociological research may have an influence on the formation of government. So again, a discussion of Giddens' 4 ways in which sociology can contribute, with the other factors that influence policy potentially more than sociological research. And there we have it. So that's social policy and sociology. Quite a big topic. Remember, you have covered social policy in lots of different topic areas: family, education, crime, whatever topics you are studying. Use your knowledge from there, the policies, the impact, the intended functions, the unintended functions. Whatever you've learned about policy, you can use here as evidence of actions, of policies, of effects. So again, don't be afraid to pull back on some of your previous knowledge as supportive evidence in a policy theory methods question. So a longer question, longer video here. Hopefully this provides a little bit of an oversight and a bit of help with social policy and sociology. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. I know I've been talking for a while. Feel free to go back through and take screenshots of any of the information if it is helpful for you in your revision resources. And again, best of luck if you have any questions or essay topics on this issue. And thanks for watching.